The crack of a rifle split the morning air like thunder, echoing off the granite walls of the Colorado Territory. Another shot followed, then another, each one closer than the last. Evelyn Carter pressed herself against the rough bark of a lodgepole pine, her breath coming in short, visible puffs in the thin mountain air. At 26, she'd learned to recognize the sound of trouble, and this particular symphony of gunfire spelled nothing but danger. The timberline stretched before her like a natural boundary between two worlds. Above lay the harsh, windswept alpine tundra. Below sprawled the dark green forest that had sheltered her for the past 3 years. She'd made camp here countless times. This particular spot chosen for its proximity to both the mining settlements down the mountain and the native trails that wound through the high country. But today, the familiar landscape felt like a trap. "Come on out, woman," a gruff voice carried through the trees. "We know you're up there." Evelyn's fingers found the worn leather of her medicine bag, checking by touch that her most essential supplies were secure. The morning had started peacefully enough. She'd been gathering yarrow near a small spring, the medicinal plant abundant in these heights despite the October chill. Now, 5 armed men were spreading through the forest below her position, their movements deliberate and coordinated. Bounty hunters, by the look of them. Though what bounty they thought she carried, she couldn't fathom. She'd seen their type before in the settlements, rough men with dead eyes and scarred hands, making their living off misery and blood money. The leader, a mountain of a man with a graying beard, wore a necklace that made her stomach turn. She didn't need to look closer to know what those small, dark objects were. The practice of taking trophies had become more common as tensions between settlers and tribes escalated, each atrocity breeding the next in an endless cycle of vengeance. A twig snapped to her left, too close. Evelyn abandoned her hiding spot, moving with the quiet efficiency learned from 3 years of survival in these mountains. Her boots, worn soft with use, made barely a whisper against the needle-covered ground. She'd learned to move like this from an old Ute woman who'd taken pity on a grieving girl fresh from Missouri, teaching her which plants healed and which killed, how to read the sky for weather, how to disappear when men with guns came calling. The timberline was still 100 yards upslope, if she could reach it. The open ground would make tracking easier, but also give her clear sight lines. These men were forest hunters. They'd be less comfortable in the exposed alpine. But 100 yards might as well have been a mile with 5 armed men converging on her position. "Ain't no use running," another voice, younger, eager. "Garrison wants to ask you some questions about that Indian you've been tending. Made it real clear we're to bring you down breathing, but he didn't say nothing about unmarked." So that was it. 3 weeks ago, she'd found a wounded man near Beaver Creek, barely conscious and burning with fever. She'd done what she always did. Cleaned his wounds, set his broken ribs, fought the infection with willow bark and prayer. She hadn't asked his name or his tribe, though his features and dress marked him as Comanche, far from his southern plains home. He'd left after 5 days, weak but mobile, pressing a small beaded pouch into her hands before disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. She should have known word would spread. It always did in these small mountain communities where gossip traveled faster than wildfire. A white woman doctoring an Indian, and a Comanche at that, was scandal enough. But if this garrison believed she knew something more, something worth sending 5 armed men into the high country. Evelyn's foot found a loose stone, sending it tumbling down the slope. The small sound seemed enormous in the tense silence. Immediately, a shout went up from the hunters. "There, by the big pine!" She ran then, abandoning stealth for speed. The thin air at nearly 10,000 feet burned in her lungs, each breath a struggle. Behind her, boots crashed through the underbrush, men's voices calling positions to each other with military precision. These weren't simple bounty hunters. They moved like soldiers, like men who'd hunted humans before. The trees began to thin as she climbed, each stride bringing her closer to the timberline, but also further from cover. An impossible choice: stay in the woods and be surrounded, or break for the open ground and present an easy target. Her grandmother would have said there was always a third option if you looked hard enough. But Evelyn's grandmother had died peacefully in her bed in Independence, not pursued by armed men through the Colorado mountains. A rifle cracked. Bark exploded from a tree inches from her shoulder, showering her with splinters. They were shooting to frighten. Not kill, not yet, but that could change in a heartbeat if she proved too troublesome to take alive. Next one won't miss, the leader's voice. Closer now. You stop running and come peaceful like. Nobody needs to get hurt. Evelyn almost laughed at that. Men like these didn't track a woman through the mountains just to ask polite questions. She'd seen what happened to people who went peaceful-like with bounty hunters. If she was lucky, she'd end up in some makeshift jail awaiting a trial that would never come. If she wasn't. The tree line broke suddenly, spilling her out onto the windswept slope above. The Timberline in October was a harsh, beautiful place. Patches of early snow clinging to northern faces. Alpine flowers long since withered. The sky so blue it hurt to look at. Up here, the wind was constant, cutting through her wool dress like it was made of paper. But up here, she could see 5 men spread in a rough line 30 yards below, emerging from the trees like wolves from cover. The leader, the one with the grotesque necklace, raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel with practiced ease. Last chance, Miss Carter. So they knew her name. This was no chance encounter. Garrison's a reasonable man, just wants to know about the Indian, where he went, what he told you. You help us, we help you. Nobody needs to die on this mountain today. Evelyn stood straight, the wind whipping loose strands of auburn hair around her face. After 3 years of healing miners' broken bones and cowboys' knife wounds, of delivering babies in drafty cabins and sitting with the dying through long mountain nights, she'd earned a reputation. The Angel of the Timberline. Some called her, though she suspected the title was more mockery than respect. A woman alone, moving freely between settlements and tribal lands, healing anyone who needed it regardless of their color or creed. She was an anomaly in this harsh land, tolerated but never truly accepted. I don't know any Garrison, she called back, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. And I've tended too many hurt men to remember everyone. You've wasted your time climbing this mountain. The leader spat to one side, tobacco juice dark against the sparse grass. Now that's disappointing. Miss Carter, real disappointing, boys. Seems the lady needs some encouragement. They began to advance, spreading wider to cut off any escape route. Evelyn backed toward a cluster of rocks, her mind racing through options. The Alpine stretched endless behind her, but without supplies, without proper gear. The high country in October was just another kind of death sentence. Below, the forest that had been her refuge now harbored her hunters. As the men closed in, Evelyn's hand found the small knife at her belt, a surgeon's blade, meant for healing, not harming. But she'd learned long ago that in the territory, sometimes the line between the two blurred beyond recognition. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the timberline, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk's cry pierced the thin air like a lament. The hunt was far from over, but as the 5 men advanced with grim purpose, Evelyn Carter knew her time as the independent healer of the high country might be drawing to a violent close, unless, like her grandmother always said, she could find that third option hidden somewhere between the rocks and the sky. The men were 20 yards away when memory crashed over Evelyn like a flash flood. Another group of armed men. Another helpless moment. But that time she'd been 13 and watching from the root cellar as fever took her family one by one. The cholera outbreak of 1871 had swept through Missouri like wildfire, and her father, despite being the town's only doctor, could do nothing but hold her mother's hand as she burned. Strange how the mind wandered when death approached. Evelyn pressed her back against the cold granite, feeling the mountain's indifference through her worn dress. The hunters had stopped their advance, perhaps sensing the cornered desperation in her stance. The leader, she could see now he had pale blue eyes like winter ice, gestured for his men to fan out wider. No need for this to get ugly, Miss Carter, he called out, his voice carrying that false reasonableness men adopted when they held all the cards. "You're a healer, not a fighter. Come quiet-like and nobody bleeds today." But Evelyn was already bleeding, not from any wound they could see, but from memories sharp as broken glass. After the fever took her parents and baby brother, she'd lived with her grandmother in Independence, learning the healing arts from a woman who'd learned them from her mother before. Herbs and poultices, tinctures and teas, the gentle touch that could ease pain when medicine failed. But her grandmother had taught her more than healing. "Sometimes, child," the old woman had said, grinding willow bark in her stone mortar, "the world won't let a woman be what she's meant to be. They'll try to box you in, tell you what's proper, what's allowed, but healing knows no boundaries. Pain speaks the same language in every throat." Those words had carried Evelyn west after her grandmother passed, armed with medical knowledge and a determination to practice it freely. The territories had seemed like a promise then, vast spaces where a woman might carve out her own existence, where need mattered more than convention. She'd been naive, but perhaps that naivety had been its own kind of courage. The first year had nearly killed her. She'd arrived in Denver with decent money from selling her grandmother's house, but city life had proven expensive and restrictive. Male doctors viewed her with suspicion at best, outright hostility at worst. One doctor, Marcus Thornton, had actually laughed when she'd applied to assist at his clinic. "Medicine is no profession for the gentler sex," he'd declared, whiskey heavy on his breath though it was barely noon. "Perhaps you could find work as a nurse, if you must, but a woman setting bones and prescribing treatments? Preposterous." So she'd left the city behind, heading into the mountains with a pack mule, her grandmother's medicine bag, and a second-hand rifle she barely knew how to use. The mining camps had been her salvation, rough places where a fever didn't care about the gender of the hands that broke it. She'd delivered her first baby in a dirt-floor shack during a blizzard, the mother a prostitute who couldn't afford the camp's official doctor. Word had spread, where the licensed doctors charged gold dust and judgment. Evelyn asked only what people could spare and kept her opinions to herself. 15 yards now. Boys!" The leader's voice cut through her reverie. "Nice and easy. Watch your hands." Her hands. Evelyn looked down at them, calloused from work, stained with plant dyes. Steady despite the situation, these hands had pulled bullets from flesh, set countless broken bones, mixed medicines by candlelight. They'd closed the eyes of miners who'd never see home again and caught babies taking their first breath in the thin mountain air. They'd also crossed boundaries that made her dangerous in the eyes of men like these. The third year of her practice, she'd encountered her first native patient, an elderly Ute man found by prospectors, left for dead after a skirmish with cavalry. The miners had brought him to her cabin more out of curiosity than compassion, but Evelyn had treated him like any other patient. He'd survived, against all odds, and before leaving had taught her about plants she'd never known. Medicinal techniques passed down through generations. Word of that had spread too, but differently. Where the mining camps had seen necessity, the broader settlements saw betrayal. A white woman treating Indians was suspicious. A white woman learning from them was worse. But Evelyn had continued, her practice expanding to include anyone who needed help: Mexican shepherds, Chinese railroad workers, native peoples from various tribes, escaped slaves heading further west, outlaws with nowhere else to turn. "You've got quite a reputation," the leader said. Closer now, close enough that she could see the tobacco stains on his teeth. The angel who don't discriminate. Noble. Some might say, others might say treasonous. "Healing has no politics," Evelyn replied, surprised at her own calm. Perhaps when you'd seen enough death, your own lost some of its terror. Disease and injury strike everyone equal. "Maybe so." Another hunter chimed in, younger, with nervous eyes. "But harboring enemies of the state, that's a different matter." Enemies of the state. Is that what the wounded Comanche had been? He'd spoken little during his recovery, but she'd seen the grief in his eyes, the kind that came from losses too profound for words. She'd asked no questions. Another lesson from her grandmother. Sometimes healing meant knowing when not to probe wounds that went deeper than flesh. The hunters were 10 yards away now, moving with the careful steps of men who'd cornered dangerous game before. Evelyn's mind raced through her options, each more desperate than the last. The knife at her belt would be useless against 5 rifles. The open ground behind her offered no cover, but surrender. She'd heard stories of what happened to Indian sympathizers, especially women. The official punishments were bad enough: imprisonment, loss of property, exile. But the unofficial ones, the ones that happened in the lawless spaces between settlements, those were worse. And these men, with their trophy necklaces and cold eyes, didn't look like they bothered much with official anything. "I've done nothing but practice medicine," she said, lifting her chin. "If that's a crime, then your quarrel is with the Hippocratic Oath, not me." The leader actually smiled at that, though it didn't reach those winter eyes. Hippocratic Oath, fancy words for a mountain woman. But you see, Miss Carter, out here we've got different oaths, simpler ones. Like the oath to protect Christian civilization from savages and those who'd help them. 5 yards now. She could see the notches on rifle stocks, the worn leather of holsters, the calculated patience of professional hunters. But she could also see something else: the slight tremor in the young one's hands, the way another kept glancing at the tree line, the leader's need to keep talking. They were nervous too, in their way. A cornered woman was unpredictable, and these mountains had swallowed more than one overconfident man. "Last chance, Miss Carter," the leader said, raising his rifle. "Come willing or come bloodied. Makes no difference to our pay." Evelyn Carter, orphan of Missouri, student of Martha Carter, healer of anyone who needed it, stood at the Timberline of Colorado territory and made her choice. Her grandmother had been right. The world wouldn't let a woman be what she was meant to be, but that had never stopped her before. "If you want me," she said quietly, hand moving to her medicine bag rather than her knife, "you'll have to take me." The mountain wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow, and somewhere below the timberline, hidden in the shadows of memory and forest, her path to this moment stretched back through 3 years of choices that had led inevitably to this one. The hunters tensed, fingers finding triggers, and Evelyn prepared to discover what came after defiance when you had nothing left to lose but principle. The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to human drama, and the next few seconds would determine whether the angel of the timberline would heal again or become another ghost story whispered in mining camps. Another casualty of a land that demanded conformity or death. The memory came unbidden as the hunters closed in. 3 weeks ago, a night when autumn rain had turned to sleet, hammering her cabin roof like scattered bullets. She'd been preparing to settle in with a medical journal when the knock came. No, not a knock, more like a body falling against her door. She'd found him collapsed on her threshold, more dead than alive, a Comanche warrior, though far from the southern plains his people called home. Blood seeped through his buckskin shirt from what looked like 3, maybe 4 bullet wounds. His face was gray with blood loss, lips blue from cold, but his dark eyes had tracked her movement with the wary intelligence of a wounded wolf. "Please," he'd whispered in accented English, the single word carrying the weight of desperate pride. Evelyn hadn't hesitated. She never did when faced with suffering. Together they'd stumbled into her cabin, him trying to walk despite legs that wouldn't hold him, her bearing most of his weight despite his attempts to spare her. He was tall for a Comanche, lean-muscled from a life of survival, and burning with fever that had nothing to do with his wounds. "Soldiers?" she'd asked as she cut away his ruined shirt, revealing damage that made her stomach clench. Someone had taken their time with at least one of these wounds. "Volunteers," he'd corrected through gritted teeth. "Colorado militia. They found our hunting camp. We were peaceful, trading horses at Fort Garland." She'd worked through the night, extracting bullets with tools sterilized in flame, packing wounds with yarrow and golden seal. He'd refused the whiskey she offered for pain, enduring her ministrations with a stoicism that both impressed and worried her. Pain was the body's warning system. Those who couldn't feel it often pushed too hard, too fast. "Your name?" she'd asked during one of the long hours, needing to keep him conscious while she worked. Nokona. Just that, no clan name or further identification. It means the Wanderer. Fitting, she'd thought, for a southern plains warrior found bleeding in the Colorado mountains. As dawnlight had crept through her windows, she'd finally finished the last suture. He'd survive. If infection didn't claim him, if his will proved as strong as his body. "Why help me?" Nokona had asked as she'd prepared a sleeping draught. "Your people would see you hanged for this." "My people saw my family die of fever while neighbors locked their doors in fear," she'd replied, surprised by her own honesty. "I learned young that my people is a flexible concept." The days that followed had been a delicate dance of healing and cautious trust. Nokona proved a difficult patient, not from complaint, but from his determination to leave before his body was ready. On the third day, she'd found him attempting to stand, sweat beading his forehead from the effort. "The militia," he'd explained when she'd scolded him back to bed. "They'll search. Every cabin, Let them search," she'd interrupted. "I've hidden injured men before." His look had been measuring then, seeing her perhaps for the first time as more than just another white woman playing at frontier life. "You're not what I expected," he'd admitted. "Neither are you," she'd countered, changing his bandages with a gentle efficiency. "I was taught that Comanches were bloodthirsty savages who lived only for war. And I was taught that white healers were frauds who poisoned more than they cured." The ghost of a smile had touched his lips. "Perhaps we were both taught by fools." As his strength returned, they'd begun to talk, carefully at first, then with growing ease. He'd told her of the southern plains, of buffalo hunts and horse raids, of a way of life being systematically destroyed by the advance of settlements and soldiers. She'd shared her own losses, her journey west, the peculiar freedom and isolation of being a woman alone in the territories. "Your medicine," he'd said one evening, watching her prepare a poultice. "Some of it I recognize." "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother first, then an old Ute man I treated. He taught me about plants I'd never seen in Missouri." Nokona had nodded slowly. "The old ways. They cross all boundaries, if we let them." On the fifth night, she'd awakened to find him standing by her window, fully dressed, his movements still stiff but determined. "I must go," he'd said before she could speak. "Every day I stay endangers you more." She'd known he was right, had known this moment would come, but something in her chest had tightened at the thought. In 5 days, this quiet, wounded warrior had shown her a kind of companionship she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Someone who understood living between worlds, who carried losses that shaped but didn't define them. "Your wounds aren't fully healed." She'd tried, even knowing it was futile. "They're healed enough." He'd moved to her, pressing something into her hands. A small beaded pouch, the geometric patterns worked in blue and white beads. "For your medicine bag," he'd said. "My sister made it. She was a healer too." Was. The word had hung between them, weighted with unspoken tragedy. She'd wanted to ask, wanted to offer comfort, but his face had closed off that possibility. Some wounds went too deep for words. "If you need help," she'd said instead, "if you're ever hurt again, I know where to find the angel who doesn't discriminate." He'd finished, and this time his smile had been real, transforming his stern features into something almost boyish. "Though next time, I'll try to arrive at a more reasonable hour." Then he'd been gone, moving into the pre-dawn darkness with the fluid grace of someone born to wild places. She'd stood in her doorway watching until the forest swallowed him, the beaded pouch warm in her hands, wondering if she'd ever see him again. Now, trapped at the Timberline with 5 hunters closing in, Evelyn understood with bitter clarity that she would likely never know. The leader had asked about an Indian she'd been tending, had mentioned someone named Garrison who wanted information. Nokona must have been captured, or worse, and somehow they'd traced him back to her. "Miss Carter," the leader's voice cut through her memories. "You've gone quiet on us. Having second thoughts about that defiance?" She blinked, returning to the harsh present. The hunters had stopped just out of lunging distance, rifles trained on her with steady hands. The morning sun was climbing higher, turning the scattered snow patches into mirrors of blinding light. Somewhere above, a hawk circled, patient as death. "The Comanche you're asking about?" she said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "He was wounded. I treated his injuries and he left. That's all." "When?" The leader's pale eyes narrowed. "Where'd he go? What'd he tell you about his business in these parts?" 5 days ago. I don't know where he went. Patients aren't required to leave forwarding addresses. And he told me nothing beyond what was necessary for his care." "You expect us to believe that?" The young nervous one again, trigger finger twitchy. "That you spent days nursing a savage back to health and never talked? Never asked why he was here? What he was planning?" "I'm a healer, not an interrogator," Evelyn replied. "My concern was infection and blood loss, not intelligence gathering." The leader spat again. Tobacco juice dark on the sparse grass. "Noble words, Miss Carter. But see, we've got a problem. That particular savage killed 3 good men down near Trinidad, ambushed a supply wagon, murdered the guards, made off with rifles and ammunition. Garrison lost his brother in that raid." Evelyn felt the words like physical blows, but kept her face neutral. It couldn't be true. The Nokana she'd treated had been hunted. Not hunting. But then, what did she really know about him beyond those 5 days? People showed you what they wanted you to see, especially when their lives depended on your goodwill. "If that's true," she said carefully, "then you should be searching for him, not threatening me." "Oh, we are searching." Another hunter chimed in, older, with scars that spoke of experience. "Been tracking him for 2 weeks. Trail led right to your cabin. Miss Carter, right to your door. I treat anyone who needs help, including enemies of decent folk." The leader cut her off. "Including killers and thieves who'd see every white person in these territories dead or driven out?" The wind gusted, knife sharp and merciless. Evelyn's hands had gone numb, whether from cold or fear she couldn't tell. The beaded pouch Nokana had given her was back in her cabin, tucked safely in her medicine bag. She wondered if she'd ever see it again, if she'd ever have the chance to ask him about the truth behind these accusations. "I've seen plenty of killers in my time," she said quietly. "They come in all colors, speak all languages. Some wear uniforms, some wear badges, some wear nothing but hate like a second skin. If healing only those deemed worthy was my calling, I'd have precious few patients." The leader's face darkened. "Garrison's gonna want to hear that kind of talk direct from your mouth. Boys, take her, alive, but she don't need to be comfortable." They moved as one, practiced and efficient. Evelyn's hand went to her knife, but she knew it was hopeless, even if she could somehow fight off 5 armed men. What then? She was alone on a mountain with winter coming, pursued by men who wouldn't stop until... A sound cut through the morning air. Not a gunshot, not a shout, but something primal and challenging. A war cry that seemed to come from the rocks themselves, echoing off granite faces until it surrounded them all. The hunters spun, rifles swinging wildly, searching for the source. Evelyn's heart leapt even as her mind rejected the possibility. It couldn't be, but it was. Nokana stood on a ridge 50 yards above them. No longer the wounded man who'd stumbled to her door, but every inch the Comanche warrior. The morning sun caught the barrel of a rifle in his hands, and his voice rang out clear and strong. "The woman is under my protection. Leave now, or feed the mountain ravens." The hunters cursed, weapons raising, but Nokana had already moved, disappearing behind rocks with the fluid grace she remembered. The leader grabbed Evelyn's arm, yanking her close as a human shield. Well, he growled. "Looks like we flushed out 2 birds with 1 stone." But Evelyn barely heard him. Despite the danger, despite the guns and the threats and the impossibility of escape, she felt something kindle in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its cousin. Nokana had come back, whether for her or for vengeance against his pursuers. She didn't know. But for the first time since the hunters had appeared, she wasn't alone. The morning was far from over. and blood might yet stain the Timberline snow. But as another war cry echoed across the mountain, Evelyn Carter understood that her solitary existence as a healer between worlds had ended, for better or worse. Her fate was now tied to a Comanche warrior who moved like shadow and struck like lightning. The real question was whether either of them would live long enough to understand what that meant. The leader's name was Harlan Briggs, Evelyn learned, as he barked orders to his men while keeping her pressed against him like a shield. His breath stank of tobacco and rotted teeth, and the barrel of his revolver dug into her ribs with casual cruelty. "Jenkins, take the high ground. Morrison, Swift, circle left through those pines. Talbot, you're with me." His voice carried the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "That savage shows himself again. You put him down. Don't care what Garrison wants. A dead Comanche's better than a loose one." The men scattered with military precision, and Evelyn realized these weren't just bounty hunters. They moved like soldiers, ex-cavalry perhaps, men who'd learned their trade in the war between the states or the endless Indian campaigns that followed. The kind of men who'd traded uniforms for profit but kept the tactics. "Your red friend made a mistake coming back," Briggs growled in her ear. "Could have run far and fast, maybe made it back to his people. Instead, he's gonna die on this mountain. And you're gonna watch." "You don't know him," Evelyn said, surprised by her own certainty. "He's survived worse than you." Briggs laughed, an ugly sound. "Every savage thinks he's invincible until he ain't. Seen plenty of them die, all the way from the Brazos to the Platte. Your Comanche boy ain't special." A shot rang out. Jenkins from the high ground, firing at movement in the rocks. The bullet sparked off granite, the whine of the ricochet sharp in the thin air. Another shot, then silence. Jenkins had lost his target. "Slippery bastard," Briggs muttered. Then louder, "Comanche, we got your woman. You want her breathing. You show yourself." Evelyn's mind raced. Nocona was outnumbered 5-1, and while he'd healed remarkably well, he was still days away from full strength. The bullet wounds might have closed, but the deep tissue damage would take weeks more to fully mend. He couldn't match these men in a straight fight, not in his condition. "He's not foolish enough to—" she began, but movement in the trees cut her short. Morrison emerged from the pines, but something was wrong. His rifle was gone, his hands pressed to his throat where blood seeped between his fingers. He took 3 stumbling steps and collapsed, the snow around him turning crimson. "Morrison!" Swift broke cover, rushing to his partner's aid. A mistake. Evelyn saw the blur of movement, heard the meaty thud of impact. Swift went down hard, unconscious or worse, his rifle spinning away across the rocky ground. "Damn it!" Briggs swung Evelyn around, using her body to shield more of himself. "Jenkins, you got eyes on him?" No response from the high ground. The silence stretched, broken only by the wind and Morrison's wet, choking breaths that were growing weaker by the second. Evelyn's medical instincts screamed at her to help, to staunch the bleeding, but Briggs's iron grip kept her immobile. "He's using Apache tactics," Talbot said, young voice cracking with nerves, striking and vanishing. "We should—" A stone flew from nowhere, catching Talbot in the temple. The young hunter dropped like a felled tree, rifle clattering on the rocks. 3 down in less than 2 minutes, and they hadn't even clearly seen their attacker. "Jenkins!" Briggs roared. "Answer me! Damn you!" The response came, but not from Jenkins. Nocona appeared on a ledge 20 yards away, Jenkins's rifle in his hands. The morning sun was at his back, turning him into a dark silhouette against the brilliant sky. When he spoke, his voice carried the calm of absolute purpose. "Let her go, Briggs. Your fight is with me." So they knew each other, or at least knew of each other. Evelyn filed that information away, another piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. "You killed my men," Briggs snarled, swinging his revolver toward the ledge. "Your men are alive." Nocona replied, "Morrison needs medical attention soon, but he'll survive if she treats him. That's more mercy than you showed my hunting party." "Mercy?" Briggs laughed bitterly. "Your kind don't know the meaning of the word. Where's my brother? Savage, where's Charlie's body? I don't know your brother. Liar. The revolver shook in Briggs's hand. Supply wagon outside Trinidad, 2 weeks back. You and your war party butchered 3 good men, including Charlie Briggs. Don't deny it. We tracked you from there. Nocona was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, something had changed in his voice. 2 weeks ago, I was 200 miles south, trying to negotiate the release of women and children taken in a raid on our village. I haven't been near Trinidad in months. Convenient story. The raid was led by Colorado volunteers under Captain Samuel Morrison. Nocona's voice cut like a blade. They took 32 prisoners. I was trying to trade horses for their freedom when your volunteers decided killing me was more entertaining than negotiation. Morrison. Evelyn glanced at the fallen hunter, still breathing but fading fast. A relative of the captain? The web of violence and vengeance in these territories ran deep and tangled, each act of brutality spawning the next in an endless cycle. Even if that's true, Briggs said, though doubt had crept into his voice. Garrison says different. Says he's got witnesses, evidence. Says you're the one who's been hitting supply lines all along the Arkansas. Garrison lies. Nocona shifted position slightly, keeping the sun at his back. Ask yourself, Briggs, what has he gained from sending you after me? What does he gain from making you believe I killed your brother? The question hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn felt Briggs tense behind her, the first crack in his certainty. But before he could respond, Talbot stirred on the ground, groaning. The young hunter rolled to his hands and knees, blood running from the gash on his temple. Stay down, boy, Nocona warned. But Talbot was already moving, scrambling for his fallen rifle. The shot was impossibly fast. Talbot's hand had barely touched the weapon when Nocona fired, the bullet striking the rifle's stock and sending it spinning away. Talbot froze, finally understanding how outmatched they were. Enough blood has been spilled. Nocona said, take your wounded and go. Tell Garrison he'll need to find another fool to do his killing. Can't do that, Briggs said, but the bluster had gone out of him. He's paying too good, and he's got connections all the way to Denver. We come back empty-handed. We're finished in these territories. Better than being finished permanent, Nocona observed. Evelyn felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Briggs was scared now. She could feel it in the tremor of his gun hand, smell it in his sudden sweat despite the cold. A scared man was unpredictable, dangerous. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and bullets would fly. There's another way, she said softly, feeling both men's attention snap to her. Morrison's dying. In 5 minutes, maybe less, he'll be beyond help. Let me treat him, and you can tell Garrison you had to choose between pursuing us and saving your man's life. It's the truth, and it gives you a way out without losing face. Shut your mouth, Briggs growled, but she could hear him thinking. Look at him, she pressed. The blood's arterial. Without immediate treatment, he's dead. Is Garrison's money worth watching your man bleed out? Is it worth explaining to his family why you let him die? The silence stretched taut. Morrison's breathing had gone shallow, rattling, time running out with each labored breath. Finally, Briggs made his choice. Talbot, he called. Can you walk? Yeah, I think so. Get to Morrison. Put pressure on the wound. He raised his voice. Comanche, we're backing off. But this ain't over. Garrison won't stop, and neither will we. You bought yourself time. Nothing more. Time is all anyone has. Nocona replied, slowly, carefully. Briggs began backing away, dragging Evelyn with him. She could break free now. He was focused on retreat. Not restraint, but sudden movement might spark violence. Better to wait, to let the situation diffuse. They'd gone 10 yards when Briggs suddenly spun her around, his pale eyes boring into hers. You're coming with us. Insurance. No! Nocona's voice cracked like a whip. She stays. Or what? You'll shoot? Risk hitting her? Briggs smiled coldly. I think not. She comes with us until we're clear of the mountain. Then maybe... The war cry that erupted from Nokona's throat was nothing human. It was the sound of pure rage, of loss and fury distilled into sound. Evelyn had heard men scream in pain, in fear, in desperation. This was none of those. This was the promise of death. Briggs' nerve broke. He shoved Evelyn away, stumbling backward, revolver swinging wildly between her and the ledge where Nokona stood. "Get Morrison!" he screamed at Talbot. "We're leaving, now!" The retreat was chaos. Talbot half dragged, half carried Morrison while Briggs covered them, backing away with his gun still raised. Swift was stirring, groaning as consciousness returned. They left Jenkins where he'd fallen on the high ground, unconscious or unwilling to show himself. Evelyn couldn't tell. She stood frozen, watching the hunters stumble down the mountain, their broken unit a far cry from the confident predators who'd cornered her an hour ago. Only when they'd vanished into the tree line did her knees give out, dropping her to the cold ground. Nokona was beside her in an instant, Jenkins' rifle abandoned, his hands gentle as they checked her for injury. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. The reaction was hitting now, tremors that had nothing to do with cold, the sick aftermath of terror. She'd faced death before, but never so personally, never with such calculated cruelty. "They'll be back," she managed. Briggs was right. Men like that don't give up. "No," Nokona agreed, his dark eyes scanning the tree line. "They'll return with more men, better prepared. We cannot stay here." "We," the word registered through her shock. Not "you cannot stay," but "we." Sometime in the last hour, her solitary existence had ended, for better or worse. She was bound to this man who fought like a ghost and carried secrets worth killing for. "Morrison," she said suddenly, the healer in her reasserting itself. Would have gotten yourself killed trying to help." Nokona's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Sometimes the choice is between one death and many. You chose wisely." The morning sun climbed higher, indifferent to human drama. Below, the hunters were gone, but their threat lingered like smoke. Above, the mountains stretched endless and unforgiving, offering cold comfort and colder sanctuary. "We need to move," Nokona said, helping her to her feet. "I know places they won't follow, not immediately." Evelyn looked back at the trampled ground, the blood-stained snow, the scattered evidence of violence, her peaceful life as a healer, her careful neutrality in the territorial conflicts, all of it ended here, at the Timberline, where choices were stripped down to their brutal essence, flee or die. "My medical supplies," she said. "My cabin cannot be retrieved, not now." Nokona's hand found hers, warm and steady despite everything. "I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should never have come to your door." She turned to face him fully then, this warrior who'd returned to danger for her sake. "I'm not sorry," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Whatever comes next, I'm not sorry I helped you." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that transformed his harsh features. "Then we go together," he said simply, "into whatever waits." The first snows of winter were coming. She could smell them on the wind. Behind them lay everything she'd built in 3 years of solitary practice. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the combined wrath of men like Garrison and Briggs. But as Nokona led her higher into the mountains, moving with the sure grace of someone born to wild places, Evelyn Carter felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Missouri. She wasn't alone. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was, perhaps, exactly what she'd been missing without knowing it. The hunt would continue. The stakes had been raised. But for now, in this moment, they were alive and free. 2 souls caught between worlds but no longer caught alone. Sometimes, in the harsh mathematics of survival, that was enough. They'd been climbing for 2 hours when the weather turned. What started as high, thin clouds quickly thickened into a gray wall advancing from the northwest. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in as many minutes, and the first snow began to fall, not the gentle flakes of early autumn, but hard, wind-driven pellets that stung exposed skin. "Storm coming fast," Nokona said, pausing to scan the landscape. They'd reached a narrow ledge 12,000 feet up, where the air was thin enough to make every breath an effort. "We need shelter." Evelyn pulled her shawl tighter, already shivering, in their haste to escape. She'd had no chance to grab her heavy coat or winter supplies. The dress and light wrap that had been adequate for a morning of herb gathering were woefully insufficient for a high mountain storm. "There." Nokona pointed to what looked like solid rock face. "Cave system. Used it before when hunting." They pushed through the mounting wind, Evelyn following in Nokona's footsteps as he picked a path across increasingly treacherous terrain. Her hands were numb, feet clumsy in boots meant for forest paths, not mountain climbing. When she stumbled, he was there, steady as the mountain itself. The cave mouth was a dark slash in the granite, barely visible until they were almost upon it. Nokona went first, checking for current residents, bears, mountain cats, or other hunters seeking shelter. His clear echoed from the darkness, and Evelyn gratefully stumbled inside. The temperature difference was immediate. Out of the wind, her body began to recognize how cold she'd become. Violent shivers racked her frame as Nokona quickly built a small fire near the cave entrance, using wood and tinder from a cache he'd apparently left on some previous visit. "You plan ahead," she observed through chattering teeth. "Survival requires it." He fed the nascent flames carefully. "This storm. It's early, even for these heights. We may be here for days." Days. Evelyn looked around their shelter as firelight began to push back the darkness. The cave extended back into the mountain, but the front chamber was large enough for comfort, perhaps 20 feet deep and 15 wide. Smoke drawings on the walls suggested others had sheltered here before them, maybe for generations. "Your wounds," she said suddenly, the physician in her asserting itself despite everything. "The climbing, the fighting, you need to let me check them. Later. First, warmth." He pulled a rolled bundle from a crevice. A blanket, worn but clean. "Remove the wet outer clothes. Hypothermia kills faster than bullets up here." She hesitated, propriety warring with practicality. But her hands were already having trouble with simple movements, and she could feel the dangerous drowsiness that preceded serious cold exposure. Turning her back, she struggled with buttons her numb fingers could barely feel. "Here." Nokona was beside her, his own hand steady as he helped with the stubborn fastenings. His touch was clinical, careful, the same detached efficiency she'd used when treating him. No shame in needing help. The mountain doesn't care about modesty. Soon she was wrapped in the blanket, her wet things spread near the fire to dry. Nokona had shed his own soaked outer garments, and in the firelight she could see the still pink scars from the wounds she'd treated. They'd healed remarkably well, but she noticed how he favored his left side, how certain movements made him catch his breath. "Now let me look," she insisted, reaching for what remained of her medical supplies. A small kit she always carried, barely enough for emergencies, but better than nothing. He submitted to her examination without protest, perhaps recognizing the futility of argument. The external wounds had closed cleanly, but as she'd suspected, the deeper damage remained. Inflammation around the worst of the bullet wounds, muscle trauma that would need weeks more to fully heal. "You shouldn't have come back," she said quietly, applying what salve she had to the angriest-looking scar. "This kind of exertion could have killed you. Leaving you to those men would have killed me differently." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if the statement required no explanation. The wind howled outside their shelter, driving snow horizontal past the cave mouth. The fire popped and crackled, creating a small sphere of warmth and light in the vast darkness. It felt like they were the only two people in the world, suspended between earth and sky. "Tell me about Trinidad," Evelyn said, needing to understand. "The truth." Nokona was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "The truth is complicated. There was a raid on a supply wagon. 3 men died. But not by my hand, and not 2 weeks ago. It happened in the summer, during the moon of hot weather. My cousin, Paha Yuka, led it, young men hungry for glory, For revenge after the volunteer attack on our camp. The one where they took prisoners. He nodded slowly. 32 women and children. Some died on the forced march. Others, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. The fate of Native women in military custody was well known. Whispered about in horrified tones even in polite society. So this Garrison is using an old crime to justify hunting you? Garrison wants me dead for other reasons. The Trinidad story is just convenient, makes it legal, gives men like Briggs a righteous cause. He turned to look at her directly. I've been working with Indian Agent Matthews, trying to negotiate peace between the bands and the settlers. Some people profit too much from war to allow peace. The pieces were falling into place. An Indian who could read, write, negotiate in English, who worked for peace rather than war, would be far more dangerous to certain interests than any number of warriors. Dead Indians sold newspapers, justified military budgets, opened land for settlement. Peaceful Indians were bad for business. Matthews, she said, is he trustworthy? As much as any white official can be. He tries, but he's one voice against many who prefer bullets to treaties. Nokona shifted, wincing slightly. He was supposed to meet me at Fort Garland. I never made it. Because of the volunteer attack? Because someone told them exactly where to find me. His eyes were dark with memory. I was betrayed. The question is, by whom? Outside, the storm intensified. Snow had already drifted past the cave entrance, partially blocking their view of the outside world. They were truly trapped now, for better or worse. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter, deeply grateful for the fire's warmth. Why did you really come back? She asked. You could have run south, back to your people. My people are scattered. Those not dead or imprisoned are hiding in the canyons, trying to survive another winter while soldiers burn our food stores and kill our horses. He was quiet for a moment. I came back because I owed you a debt, and because... He trailed off, but she understood. The same loneliness that had driven her into the mountains had touched him too. They were both orphans in their way, cut off from their peoples by choice or circumstance, trying to find meaning in a world that seemed determined to grind them down. What happens when the storm passes? She asked. We have choices. North to the mining camps. You have friends there who might shelter us. South toward New Mexico, where the territorial lines make pursuit harder. Or deeper into the mountains, where men like Briggs fear to go, but winter comes harder. What about your peace negotiations? Agent Matthews may already be dead, or maybe the one who betrayed me. He shrugged, a gesture eloquent in its fatalism. Trust is a luxury neither of us can afford now. The fire burned lower, and Nokona added more wood from his cache. In the renewed light, Evelyn studied him, really looked for the first time without the filter of patient and healer. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with the kind of face that would age into distinguished lines rather than weathered leather. His hands were scarred from a lifetime of survival, but gentle when they needed to be. There was a sadness in him that matched her own, but also a strength that had nothing to do with physical prowess. I need to tell you something, she said. About Briggs. When he grabbed me, when he was using me as a shield, he was afraid. Not just of you, but of something else. He kept looking at the tree line like he expected someone else to appear. Nokona's attention sharpened. You think he wasn't alone? I think Garrison has more men in these mountains than just those 5, and I think... She paused, trying to articulate the feeling. I think this is bigger than just you. The way Briggs talked, the way he kept mentioning witnesses and evidence, it felt rehearsed, like he was playing a part, a wider conspiracy. Nokona stared into the fire, using the hunt for a savage killer to cover other crimes. It wouldn't be the first time. The wind screamed past their shelter, carrying the promise of a long, bitter storm. They were safe for now, but when it passed, they'd face choices that would define not just their survival, but who they chose to be. Run and hide, abandoning any hope of justice, or turn and fight, knowing the odds were stacked impossibly against them. You asked why I came back, Nokona said suddenly. The truth, when I left your cabin, I made it 5 miles before turning around. I told myself it was to watch, to ensure those men didn't come for you, but, she prompted softly. But I think I was looking for a reason to return. 5 days in your care, and I remembered what it felt like to be seen as a man instead of a savage, to talk of things beyond survival, to hope. He laughed, short and bitter. Foolish for a warrior to admit such weakness. Not weakness, Evelyn said firmly. Human. We're allowed to be human, even here, even now. He looked at her then, really looked, and something passed between them, understanding deeper than words, recognition of kindred spirits in an unkind world. The fire crackled, the storm raged, and 2 people who should have been enemies by every rule of their society sat together in perfect accord. When the storm breaks, Nokona said finally, we go south. I know people in the Sangre de Cristo range, hidden valleys where garrison's reach doesn't extend. You can practice your medicine there, and I can heal properly. Then we decide whether to keep running or turn and fight. He smiled, the expression transforming his face. You sound like a warrior. Maybe that's what the world makes of healers who refuse to choose sides. She managed a smile of her own. My grandmother would be scandalized. Mine would understand perfectly. Apache women know that sometimes the greatest courage is not in fighting, but in refusing to hate. The storm would rage through the night and possibly longer. They had minimal supplies, uncertain shelter, and enemies waiting below. But in this moment, sitting by a small fire while winter tried to claim the mountain, Evelyn felt more at peace than she had in years. Not alone, not afraid, just present, sharing warmth and understanding with someone who knew what it meant to be caught between worlds. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, they had fire, shelter, and something that might grow into more than mere alliance, if they survived long enough to let it bloom. The wind howled its fury, but inside the cave, 2 hearts beat in quiet defiance of a world that would see them apart or dead, and sometimes, in the vast indifference of the mountains, that small rebellion was everything. The storm broke on the 3rd day, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. They emerged from the cave like winter spirits, breath steaming in the crystal air. The landscape below was deceptively peaceful, a white blanket hiding the dangers beneath. They'll be watching the obvious routes, Nokona said, studying the terrain with a tracker's eye. But snow works both ways, covers our tracks, but also theirs. They'd spent the storm days planning, sharing knowledge, preparing for what came next. Evelyn had fashioned makeshift snowshoes from pine branches and leather strips cut from their spare clothing. Nokona had taught her to move silently, to read the subtle signs of passage that even snow couldn't completely hide. Now, as they began their descent toward the southern passes, every shadow could hide an enemy. They moved in careful stages. Advance, watch, listen, advance again. The thin air made even careful movement exhausting, but stopping too long meant freezing. It was early afternoon when Nokona suddenly froze, hand raised for silence. Evelyn stopped instantly, heart pounding. He pointed to a cluster of aspens below. Nothing seemed amiss, but she'd learned to trust his instincts. Then she saw it, a flash of movement, unnatural in the still forest, metal catching sunlight where no metal should be. They'd been found. Back, Nokona breathed, already moving, but it was too late. Hold right there, Briggs' voice rang out, triumphant. He emerged from the aspens, rifle trained on them. 4 more men materialized from concealment, not the same group as before. Fresh hunters, uninjured and ready. Figured you'd have to come down eventually. Briggs called. Storm was a blessing, really. Gave us time to bring reinforcements. Set up proper like. They were 15 yards away. Too far for Nokona to rush them. Too close to miss if they fired. The hunters had chosen their ambush well, uphill from their targets. Clear firing lines. No immediate cover for the pursued. Miss Carter, Briggs continued, that false friendliness back in his voice. You've led us quite a chase, but it ends here. You come quiet. We might even let your savage friend die quick. Garrison wants us alive, Evelyn said. Playing for time, for options. Garrison wants him alive. Briggs corrected. He's less particular about, said you know enough to be useful, but not so much you can't be replaced. One of the new hunters, a lean man with dead eyes, spoke up. Why we wasting time talking? Put the Indian down. Take the woman. Simple. Because, Henley, I want to do this proper. But Briggs was nervous. Evelyn could see it in how he kept shifting his weight, checking his flanks. 3 days to plan. And he was still afraid of Nokona. Tell me something, Briggs. Nokona said calmly, How much is Garrison paying you? Enough to buy your brother back? The rifle in Briggs' hands trembled slightly. You shut your mouth about Charlie. I didn't kill him. You know that now, don't you? Had 3 days to think about it, to add up the dates and distances. Nokona took a small step forward, hands visible but ready. So ask yourself, who profits from you believing I did? I said shut. Garrison knew your brother, knew his roots, his schedules. Another careful step. Convenient how he had witness testimony ready, evidence prepared, almost like he knew beforehand what would happen to that wagon. You're lying. But doubt had crept into Briggs's voice. Am I? Check the manifest from that raid. See what was really in those wagons. Not supplies. Garrison wouldn't send 5 men into these mountains for lost bacon and flour. Evelyn caught on to what Nokona was doing. Not just stalling, but sowing seeds of doubt, turning the hunters against their employer. It might not save them, but confused enemies were better than united ones. He's trying to trick you. Henley snarled. Garrison warned us about his silver tongue. Garrison warns about a lot of things, another hunter muttered. Like how this was supposed to be easy money? Enough. Briggs steadied his rifle. Take them. Alive, if possible, but... Evelyn never saw Nokona move. One moment he was standing beside her. The next, he'd shoved her sideways into a snowbank while diving the opposite direction. Gunfire erupted, bullets cutting the air where they'd been standing. Circle them! Briggs roared, but Nokona was already among the trees, moving like smoke despite his healing wounds. Evelyn rolled, came up running. A hunter appeared in front of her, one of the new ones, young and eager. He raised his rifle, but she was already inside his reach. Her grandmother's voice echoed. Sometimes healing means knowing where to hurt. Her knee found his groin, her elbow his throat. He went down gasping. She grabbed his rifle, then immediately dropped it. She'd never fired a gun. Wouldn't know how to aim it properly. Instead, she took his knife and kept moving, using the trees and terrain as Nokona had taught her during their cave-bound days. Behind her, men shouted and cursed. More gunfire, but scattered now. Confused, she caught glimpses through the trees, Nokona using guerrilla tactics, striking and vanishing, turning the hunters' numbers against them as they risked shooting each other in the melee. The woman! Briggs's voice, frustrated and angry. Get the damn woman! Evelyn burst from the tree line onto a rocky slope. Mistake. No cover here, nowhere to... Pain exploded through her shoulder as a bullet found its mark. She stumbled, fell, skidded down loose scree. The world spun. White snow and blue sky kaleidoscoping together. When she finally stopped rolling, she could barely tell which way was up. Footsteps crunched through snow above her. Got her! Someone called. Henley appeared, rifle pointed at her chest. You move, you die. Blood was spreading across her dress, hot against the cold air. Her medical knowledge cataloged the damage automatically, through and through, high on the shoulder. Painful but not immediately fatal if treated. Big if. Leave her. Nokona's voice cracked like a whip. He stood on a ridge 50 feet away, a captured rifle in his hands. Your fight is with me. My fight is with whoever I'm paid to fight, Henley replied. But his attention had shifted to the greater threat. Evelyn saw her chance. Her good hand found a fist-sized rock, hefted it. When Henley glanced back at her, she threw with all her remaining strength. The rock caught him in the face, sending him reeling. His shot went wild. Nokona moved like lightning, covering the distance in heartbeats. His rifle butt caught Henley's jaw with a sound like breaking kindling. The hunter dropped, unconscious or worse. "Can you move?" Nokona was beside her, hands already examining her wound. Yes, maybe." The world kept trying to tilt sideways. More shouts from above. The remaining hunters had regrouped, were advancing in tactical formation. Nokona looked at the open slope, at her bleeding shoulder, and made a decision that showed clear in his face. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "There's a ravine 20 yards east. Deep, but the snow will have filled it partially. You jump, you might survive. Better chances than staying here." "Jump?" Was he insane? "What about you?" "I'll hold them here." He checked the rifle, chambered around. "Give you time to—" "No." Despite the pain, despite everything, she gripped his arm. "We go together or not at all. Evelyn, I won't have another death on my conscience. Won't run while you die for my mistakes." He stared at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. Stubborn woman, stubborn man. The hunters were close now, calling positions to each other. In seconds, they'd have clear shots. The ravine yawned to their left, a dark gash in the white landscape. Certain death or possible death. Some choice. "Together then," Nokona said. He pulled her to her feet, supporting her weight. "On 3. This is insane." "Yes," he actually smiled. "My grandmother would approve." 1. Gunfire erupted. Snow exploded around them. No more time for counting. They ran, stumbled, toward the ravine edge. Evelyn could see it now. A 30-foot drop onto snow-covered rocks. Madness. Now! They jumped. For a moment. They flew. The world fell away. Hunters, gunfire, pain. Everything reduced to the sensation of falling. Evelyn had time for one thought. At least I'm not alone. Then impact. Snow. Blessed snow. Deeper than she'd dared hope. They hit hard but not lethally, plunging through white powder that cushioned the worst of it. She felt ribs crack, tasted blood, but she was alive. Somehow, impossibly, alive. Nokona pulled her from the snow crater they'd made, both of them gasping. Above, hunters lined the ravine edge, but the angle was bad for shooting. They'd have to find another way down. "Can you walk?" His own face was tight with pain. The jump had reopened at least one of his wounds. "Do I have a choice?" They stumbled deeper into the ravine, using mutual support to stay upright. Behind them, Briggs screamed orders, fury making him careless. The hunters would follow, but it would take time. Time they desperately needed. The ravine twisted, narrowed, opened again. They splashed through an icy stream. The cold water shocking but clearing Evelyn's head. Her shoulder was still bleeding, leaving a trail, but stopping meant death. "There," Nokona pointed. A game trail, barely visible, leading up the opposite wall. "We climb." It was agony. Every handhold sent fire through her shoulder. Every step threatened to pitch them back into the ravine. But they climbed, inch by tortuous inch, while below the sounds of pursuit grew closer. They'd almost reached the top when Evelyn's strength finally gave out. Her hand slipped, body tilting backward toward the drop. This was it then. Nokona's hand caught hers, held fast, with strength she didn't know he still possessed. He hauled her up and over the edge. They lay gasping in the snow. Spent. "Get up." His voice was gentle but firm. Not safe yet. She wanted to argue, wanted to simply close her eyes and let the cold take her. But his hand was still in hers, warm and real and refusing to let go. So she stood, leaning heavily on him, and they continued their impossible flight. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of blood and gold, somewhere behind them. Hunters cursed and searched. Ahead lay uncertainty, injury, and odds that grew longer with each drop of blood in the snow. But they were alive, together, still fighting. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For jumping with me." He squeezed her hand. The gesture saying more than words could. They stumbled onward into the gathering darkness. two wounded souls refusing to surrender, bound now by more than circumstance, by choice, by sacrifice, by something that might be love if they lived long enough to name it. The mountains watched, ancient and indifferent, as they disappeared into the shadows between the peaks. Behind them, Briggs's frustrated roar echoed off stone, a promise that this was far from over. But for now, in this moment between day and night, between life and death, they were free. They sheltered that night in a shallow overhang, hardly more than a depression in the rock face. Nokona had built a small fire, risking the smoke for the warmth they desperately needed. Evelyn sat propped against the stone wall, trying not to move her shoulder while he prepared what medical supplies they'd salvaged. "The bullet went through clean," she instructed. Teeth gritted against the pain. "That's good. Pack it with the yarrow paste. In my bag." Her small medical kit had survived the ravine, a miracle in itself. Nokona worked with careful hands, following her directions precisely. When he pressed the poultice against the wound, she bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. The last thing they needed was to announce their position. "You've done this before," she observed when the worst had passed, watching him secure the bandage with practiced efficiency. "Too many times." He moved to tend his own reopened wounds, but she stopped him. "Let me. I can still use one hand." They worked in silence, patching each other as best they could with limited supplies. The intimacy of it, this mutual caretaking in the face of death, created a bubble of calm in the dangerous night. But Evelyn knew it couldn't last. Briggs would find them. If not tomorrow, then the day after. They were leaving too clear a trail, moving too slowly. "We need help," she said finally. "Real help, somewhere to rest, to heal properly." Nokona nodded slowly. "There's a place, a trading post run by a man named Samuel Ortiz, 2 days south. If we can make it, he trades with everyone. Settlers, natives, outlaws, neutral ground. Will he shelter us? For a price. And if Garrison hasn't already bought him? Always if. Every potential ally might be an enemy, every shelter a trap. But what choice did they have? They couldn't run forever, not in their condition." Dawn came pale and cold. They moved carefully, using every trick Nokona knew to obscure their trail. Doublebacks, stream crossings, false paths. It would slow experienced trackers but not stop them. Nothing would stop men like Briggs except death, theirs or his. By midday, Evelyn's shoulder was on fire, infection starting, despite their efforts. She didn't tell Nokona, but he knew. She could see it in how often he glanced at her, in the worry that tightened his jaw. They were racing against time now, and losing. They crested a ridge and froze. Below, blocking the valley they needed to cross, was a camp. 5 men, horses, the glint of rifles. But not Briggs's group. These men wore military insignia, cavalry. "Patrol!" Nokona breathed, pulling her back into cover. "Looking for us, or just bad timing?" As if in answer, one of the soldiers held up a paper, showing it to his companions, even from distance. Evelyn could see it was a wanted poster. 2 figures sketched in black ink, a white woman and an Indian man. The price underneath made her stomach drop. $5,000. More money than most men saw in a lifetime. "Garrison's upped the stakes," she whispered. "Dead or alive, from the look of it." Nokona's expression was grim. "Military involvement changes things. We can't fight the army. Can we go around?" He studied the terrain with a tracker's eye. "Not without adding days to our journey. Days we don't have." Evelyn felt the wound fever building, knew her time was running short. A desperate idea formed. "What if I go to them, tell them you forced me, that I'm a hostage? They'd take me for medical treatment, and you could—" "No." The word was flat, final. "We stay together. Nokona, be practical. I'm slowing you down. If you could reach your people. My people are scattered or dead. You are—" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenched. "I'm what?" "The only reason I'm still fighting." The admission seemed pulled from him. "Before your cabin, before you, I was ready to die. Let the volunteers finish what they started." Then you showed me kindness without price, healing without judgment. You gave me back something I'd lost. What? Hope. He turned to face her fully. So no, I won't leave you. Not to them, not to Briggs, not to anyone. We survive together or we fall together. That's my choice. The cavalry patrol was moving, heading down the valley in a search pattern. Soon they'd be cut off entirely. But as Evelyn watched Nokona, this warrior who chose hope over hate, who'd risked everything to protect her, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not just gratitude or even affection, but something deeper, stronger, something worth fighting for. Then we need another way, she said. What would your grandmother do? You said Apache women know about courage beyond fighting. A slow smile crossed his face. She'd say the best warriors know when to use cunning instead of strength. Wait here. Before she could protest, he was gone, melting into the landscape. Evelyn pressed herself against the rocks, heart pounding. Below, the patrol continued their methodical search. 10 minutes passed. 20. Where was... A cry went up from the far end of the valley. The soldiers spun, weapons raised, as one of their horses bolted, then another. Within moments, the entire string was running, spooked by something only they could sense. The cavalrymen cursed and gave chase, discipline breaking down in the face of losing their mounts in hostile territory. Nokona reappeared beside her like a ghost. Apache trick. Horses smell what humans can't. Little bit of bear scent goes a long way. Bear scent? Where did you... Better not to ask. Come, while they're distracted. They slipped across the valley like shadows, using the chaos of the horse chase as cover. Every step sent fire through Evelyn's shoulder, but she forced herself to keep moving. They were so close to the other side when shouts erupted behind them. There, by the rocks! Or, one soldier had stayed behind, more disciplined than his fellows. His rifle cracked, the bullet sparking off stone inches from Evelyn's head. They ran, or tried to, more like desperate stumbling as their bodies reached their limits. Another shot, another miss. The soldier was mounting his remaining horse, would run them down in moments. Nokona spun, raising his captured rifle. But Evelyn could see his hands shaking from exhaustion and blood loss. The shot would be almost impossible. Together, she said, moving beside him. I'll steady the barrel. It was awkward. Her using her good arm to support the rifle while he aimed. The cavalryman was bearing down. Saber drawn now for close work. 50 yards, 40, 30. Now, Evelyn whispered. The rifle cracked. The cavalryman jerked, tumbled from his horse. Not dead. She could see him moving, but down. It would have to be enough. They didn't wait to see if he'd recover. Using the last of their strength, they climbed into the higher rocks where horses couldn't follow. Behind them, shouts indicated the other soldiers had heard the shot. Were returning, but they'd bought time. Precious minutes. Hours later, collapsed in another cave. Nokona tended the cavalryman's bullet graze on Evelyn's arm. When had that happened? She couldn't remember. Everything was blurring together, fever and exhaustion making the world uncertain. The trading post, she mumbled. How much further? One more day, maybe less. He pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Stay with me, Evelyn. Stay awake. Trying, but darkness kept creeping in at the edges. Tell me something. Keep me here. What should I tell you? About hope, about why you're still fighting. He was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. My grandmother used to say that hope was like water in the desert. You might not see it, but it's there, flowing underground, waiting. You just have to know where to dig. And you think we're digging? I think we're drowning men who found an oasis in each other. His hand found hers, held tight. I think the world tried to make us enemies, but we chose differently. That's hope enough for me. She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him what that meant to her, but words were becoming impossible. The fever was winning. She felt herself sliding away despite his voice calling her back. The last thing she remembered was Nokona lifting her, cradling her against his chest as he carried her into the night, his heartbeat steady against her ear, his voice a constant murmur, prayers or promises. She couldn't tell. Not much further. He kept saying, "Stay with me, not much further." But further to what? Safety, death, or something else entirely? A future neither of them had dared imagine when this chase began. Consciousness fled before she could decide, leaving only the sensation of being held, being fought for, being refused to be let go. In her fever dreams, she flew again, not falling this time, but soaring. And beside her, matching her wing beat for wing beat, was a warrior who'd chosen hope over vengeance, love over loss, somewhere in the darkness between midnight and dawn, between life and whatever came after. Two hearts beat their defiance against a world that would see them apart. Whether those heartbeats would continue beyond the sunrise remained to be seen. But for now, in this moment suspended between seconds, they beat as one. Evelyn woke to the scent of sage and wood smoke, her fever finally broken. She lay on a proper bed, the first in days, covered with a woven blanket that carried the geometric patterns of native craftsmanship. Sunlight streamed through a window. Actual glass, speaking of civilization, however rough. "You're awake." Nokona sat beside her, relief evident in his dark eyes. "I was beginning to think, how long?" "2 days. Your fever broke last night." He helped her sit up, movements gentle. "We made it to Ortiz's post. He's agreed to shelter us, for now." The trading post was a sturdy adobe building, built to withstand both weather and siege. Through the window, Evelyn could see a courtyard where horses dozed in the morning sun. It felt impossibly peaceful after their desperate flight. "Briggs?" "No sign yet, but he'll come." Nokona's expression darkened. "Ortiz has heard things. Garrison's put out word. Any man who brings us in gets the bounty plus a share of some bigger prize. Something about land grants, water rights, the kind of wealth that makes men do terrible things." Before Evelyn could respond, the door opened. A compact Mexican man entered, carrying a tray of food. Samuel Ortiz had the careful eyes of someone who'd survived by reading people quickly and accurately. "Señorita Carter," he said in accented English. "Good to see you among the living. You gave your man here quite a scare." Your man. The casual assumption sent warmth through her chest. She glanced at Nokona, who looked studiously neutral. "Thank you for the shelter, Señor Ortiz," she said. "I know the risk you're taking. Risk is part of business out here." He set down the tray, beans, tortillas, blessed coffee. "But perhaps we can discuss making it worthwhile, no? Your friend here mentioned you have medical skills." "I do. My wife, she is with child. Her last pregnancy." He crossed himself. "The baby came too early, didn't survive. She fears this one will go the same way. If you could examine her, perhaps." "Of course," Evelyn said immediately. "As soon as I can stand properly." Ortiz's weathered face softened. "Gracias. For that, you have sanctuary as long as I can provide it." After he left, Evelyn ate slowly, regaining strength with each bite. Nokona watched her, something unspoken in his silence. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked. "Ortiz had news. Agent Matthews, he's dead. Found shot on the road to Fort Garland, made to look like robbery. Garrison? Who else, with Matthews gone? Any chance of official protection dies with him." He stood, pacing to the window. "We're alone in this." "We've been alone from the start," Evelyn pointed out. "It hasn't stopped us yet." "You almost died." His voice carried self-recrimination. "Because of me, because I brought this trouble to your door." "No." She set aside the tray, standing despite wobbly legs. "I made my choices. I'd make them again. Even knowing where they led?" She crossed to him, placed her good hand on his arm. "Especially knowing where they led." He turned to face her fully, and she saw everything in his eyes, the grief, the guilt, the growing feeling between them that neither had dared name. The morning light caught the angles of his face, highlighting scars earned in a lifetime of survival. "Evelyn," he began, then stopped, Started again. When you were dying, when the fever had you, I made promises to spirits, to God, to anyone who would listen. Said I'd give anything to see you well again. What did you promise? To let you go, to leave once you were healed, draw Garrison's hunters away, give you back your life. Her heart constricted. And if I don't want my old life back, then you're as foolish as I am. But his hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. This can only end badly, you know that. Everything ends. Nokona. That doesn't mean it isn't worth having. A shout from the courtyard shattered the moment. They rushed to the window to see riders approaching. 5, 10, more. Briggs led them, his gray beard unmistakable even at distance. But it was the man beside him that made Evelyn's blood run cold. Well-dressed, silver-haired, riding like he owned the world. Garrison, Nokona said unnecessarily. He's come himself. Ortiz met them in the main room, face grim. They're demanding I turn you over. I've told them you're under Trader's protection, but Garrison doesn't recognize such niceties. Nokona finished. How long? An hour, maybe 2. I can stall. Claim you've already left, but they'll search regardless. Evelyn's mind raced. They couldn't run. She was still too weak, and they'd be ridden down in minutes. Fight? Suicide against those numbers? Which left? Let me talk to him, she said. Both men turned to stare. Garrison, he wants something beyond just us. Let me find out what. Absolutely not, Nokona said flatly. He'll kill you. No. If he wanted us dead, we'd be dead. He wants us alive for a reason. She looked between them. Trust me, I've spent 3 years reading people in pain. Garrison's in pain too, different kind, but pain nonetheless. Before they could stop her, she walked out into the courtyard. The morning sun was blinding after the dim interior. Garrison's men spread out, rifles ready, but she kept her attention on their leader, up close. Garrison was older than she'd expected, with the pallor of someone who spent more time in offices than outdoors. His eyes, though, cold gray like winter ice, like Briggs's but with intelligence behind the cruelty. Miss Carter, he said, touching his hat brim in mock courtesy, you've led us quite a chase. Mr. Garrison, I understand you've been spreading lies about a Comanche warrior. Why? His smile was thin. Direct. I appreciate that in a woman, even if it's unbecoming. He dismounted, approached her. No lies. Miss Carter, your savage friend is exactly what I say. A killer. A threat to decent civilization. We both know that's not true. Truth is what men with power say it is. He circled her slowly. Predatory. But you're right. I do want something beyond your red friend's scalp. You see, there's going to be a war. A big one. The government's finally going to clean out these territories, make them safe for proper settlement, and wars, Miss Carter, require justification. Understanding dawned, cold and terrible. You need an incident, something to point to justify military action. Clever girl, a white woman, respected healer, murdered by a savage after being held captive, perhaps tortured first. Details to be determined. The newspapers would howl for blood. Congress would authorize whatever measures necessary. But I'm not dead. Not yet. His smile widened. Though that can be remedied. Or you could live, both of you. Far from here. Somewhere my reach doesn't extend. Mexico, perhaps. Or California. All you have to do is play along with a little fiction. Sign a statement about your captivity, the horrors you endured. Let me parade you before some journalists, then disappear. Everyone wins. Except the innocents who'll die in your war. Progress demands sacrifice. He shrugged. It's happening anyway. Miss Carter, the only question is whether you'll be a footnote or a survivor. Evelyn felt the weight of the choice. Behind her, she sensed Nokona had emerged, probably with Ortiz's rifle. One wrong move and violence would erupt. But Garrison seemed unconcerned, confident in his numbers. I need time. she said. To think. 1 hour. Garrison remounted. Then I'm coming in. Trader's protection be damned. Choose wisely. Miss Carter, choose life. They withdrew, but not far. Evelyn saw them setting up positions, covering all exits, a siege, however brief. Inside, Nokona was pacing like a caged wolf. We can't trust him, even if you agreed. He'd kill us anyway. Witnesses to his scheme. I know. Evelyn sank into a chair, exhaustion pulling at her. But it buys us time. For what? We're trapped. She looked at him, this warrior who'd given up everything for her, who'd carried her through fever and snow, who'd chosen hope when hate would have been easier. And she knew, with sudden clarity, what had to happen. Nokona, she said quietly, do you trust me? With my life. Then listen. An hour later, Evelyn emerged again, but this time she wasn't alone. Ortiz's wife Maria walked beside her, visibly pregnant, moving carefully. Behind them came Ortiz himself, then his 2 young daughters, then Nokona, unarmed, hands visible. Garrison straightened in his saddle. What is this? Witnesses, Evelyn said simply. You want a story? I'll give you one, but not the one you're expecting. She raised her voice, carrying to all the assembled men. I am Evelyn Carter, healer of these territories. 3 weeks ago, I treated a wounded man, as I've treated hundreds before. I did so freely, as my oath demands. This man, she gestured to Nokona, committed no crimes against me. Instead, he saved my life when your hunters would have killed me for the crime of healing. Shut your mouth, Briggs growled, but Garrison raised a hand for silence. Evelyn continued. If you take us before witnesses. This family, this community, will know what happened. They'll talk, as people do. The story will spread, but not the one you want. The story of a healer murdered for showing mercy, of an innocent man framed for crimes he didn't commit. No one will believe. Won't they? Evelyn stepped forward. I've delivered babies in half the mining camps in these mountains, set bones, fought fever, saved lives. Every miner, every prostitute, every widow I've helped will ask questions, and questions, Mr. Garrison, are dangerous to men with secrets. She saw the calculation in his eyes. His plan required her to be a symbol, but symbols could cut both ways. A martyred healer might spark just as much outrage, but directed at different targets. Additionally, she said, playing her final card, I've written letters to newspapers in Denver, to friends in Missouri, to anyone who might listen. If I disappear, those letters get sent. Your name features prominently. A lie, but a plausible one. Garrison's jaw worked, fury barely controlled. Around them, his men shifted uneasily. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. Hunting dangerous Indians was one thing, but murdering women and families in broad daylight? You're making a mistake, Garrison said finally. This offer won't come again. I know. Evelyn reached for Nokona's hand, gripped it tight. But some things are worth more than safety. Long moments passed. Then Garrison wheeled his horse around. Briggs, we're leaving. But, sir, I said we're leaving. He looked back at Evelyn, and she saw promise in those winter eyes. This isn't over. You've chosen your side. Miss Carter, remember that when the blood starts flowing. They rode away in a cloud of dust and barely leashed violence. Evelyn stood watching until they disappeared. Then her knees gave out. Nokona caught her, held her steady. That was insane, he murmured. Brave and insane. It worked, didn't it? For now. He helped her back inside, but he's right. This isn't over. We've made an enemy who won't forget. Then we'd better be ready. She looked up at him. This man who'd become everything. Together? Together, he agreed, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of promises and gunpowder, of hope and defiance. Outside, the sun climbed toward noon, indifferent to human struggles. But in a small trading post on the edge of nowhere, 2 hearts had chosen each other over safety, love over fear. It wasn't an ending. Garrison would be back. The territories would bleed, and their future remained uncertain as mountain weather. But for now, in this moment stolen from chaos, they were alive and together. Sometimes, in a world that demanded conformity or death. That small rebellion was revolution enough. The morning light blessed them through dusty windows as they held each other. Two souls who'd found home in the last place anyone would look, in each other's arms, in each other's courage, in the choice to hope when hatred would have been easier. Whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it as they'd learned to face everything. Together, defiant, and absolutely unwilling to let the world tear apart what they'd built from the ashes of who they used to be. In the distance, a hawk cried its freedom to the sky, and in a trading post where cultures met and mixed, where love grew despite all odds, two people began to plan a future that no one, not Garrison, not Briggs, not all the armies of progress, had the power to stop. Because some things, once joined, could never be torn asunder. Some choices, once made, echoed through eternity, and some loves, forged in fire and tempered in snow, were stronger than all the forces that would see them fail. This was only the beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow Wild West story enthusiasts from around the world. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Evelyn and Nokuna's journey in the comments below.